Under the bright lights of the stage, a young girl took her first step forward, clutching an old violin so close to her chest as if it were her only treasure. The wooden body of the violin was scratched. Its strings looked worn, and even the bow was a little frayed. She looked too small for the stage, too shy for the crowd that sat before her. Her shoes clicked softly on the wooden floor, but to her ears it sounded like thunder. Each step made her heart beat faster, louder, until she thought everyone in the audience could hear it. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her dress was plain, faded from too many washes. The stage curtains behind her were a deep red, rich and heavy, and they made her look even smaller. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring at her, judging her before she even played a note. The whispers started almost immediately, soft at first, but then growing. Some in the crowd leaned to each other and laughed quietly. One man shook his head as if to say she didn't belong there. A group of students sitting in the back row smirked openly, waiting for her to fail. The girl's hands trembled as she held her violin. She had practiced this moment again and again in the small room she called home. She had closed her eyes many nights and imagined standing right here, but in her dreams the audience was kind. In reality, the sound of cruel laughter scraped against her heart. She bit her lip to stop it from trembling. She could almost hear her father's voice in her mind, telling her to be strong. Her father had worked day and night, saving every small coin he could just to buy her this violin. It wasn't shiny or new, but it carried his love, and that made it priceless. She walked slowly to the center of the stage. Her fingers felt cold, her legs weak for a moment. She thought about turning around, running off the stage and never coming back. The exit was right there behind the curtain, and it seemed so tempting. But then she remembered the last words her father had whispered to her before he passed away. Never stop playing no matter what, your music is your voice, and one day it will be heard. Those words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket, giving her courage. The microphone above her caught the sound of her shaky breathing, and the audience heard it. Some laughed again, louder this time, as if her nerves were the final proof she would fail. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The hall smelled faintly of wood and polish, and the lights above her seemed to burn into her skin. But she forced herself to raise her chin. Her eyes scanned the room, rows of faces waiting to judge her, waiting to dismiss her. Her fingers brushed the violin strings as if she was reminding herself it was real. She thought back to all the nights when she had practiced with tears in her eyes, hungry, tired, but never giving up. She thought of her small window at home, how the stars had been her silent audience for so long. Now she had a hall full of strangers staring at her, but she decided to treat them like those stars. Silent and distant, she could not let their laughter crush her. She could not let their stares steal her voice. She placed the violin under her chin, adjusting it carefully. Her small hands looked almost too fragile for the instrument, but she held it with determination. Her bow hovered over the strings, trembling slightly. The entire hall grew quiet for just a moment. Waiting, some leaned forward, ready to laugh again. Others curious to see what sound would come. The girl's lips pressed together as she whispered in her heart, "This is for you, Papa." Her body stopped trembling. Her shoulders straightened, and her eyes, though still nervous, carried a spark of something stronger. The nervous entrance was almost over. She was about to play, and when she did, the world that had mocked her would finally hear her story. That moment before the first note felt endless. The silence was heavy, filled with doubt from the crowd and hope from the girl. She was nervous, she was scared, but she was also ready. This was not just a performance. It was her life, her promise, her father's dream. And though her entrance was shaky and mocked by many, what came next would change everything. As she stood in the center of the stage, the silence did not last long. A few seconds later, the cruel sound of laughter rose from the back rows. It was not hidden, not quiet, but sharp enough for everyone to hear. A boy leaned forward and whispered something to his friend, and both of them burst out laughing. Their voices carried across the hall, making the girl's ears burn. Some adults in the crowd exchanged glances and smirked as if they already knew the performance would be a failure. It felt as if the entire room was united against her before she even played a single note. Her fingers shook harder as she held the bow. She tried to tighten her grip, but her palms were sweaty. The wooden handle felt slippery. The weight of the violin in her hands grew heavier with every heartbeat. She lowered her eyes to the floor for a moment, trying to escape the dozens of eyes staring at her. The red curtain behind her felt like a wall, and she felt trapped between it and the mocking crowd. The laughter continued, one chuckle here, one whisper there, growing like ripples in a pond. She could hear words mixed into the giggles, cruel little sentences that cut into her like knives. "She's too small," someone muttered. "She looks like she can't even hold that thing properly," another added. One of the judges at the long desk in front sighed quietly and shook his head, and that small movement stabbed her heart deeper than the laughter did. Her throat tightened and her chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw the violin away and disappear forever for a second. Her knees bent as if she was about to turn around. The thought of rushing off stage and hiding in the dark corner backstage flashed through her mind. She could hear the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears, faster and louder, mixed with the cruel laughter. But in the middle of that storm of doubt, a memory lit up inside her. She saw her father's tired face, the gentle smile he always gave her when she practiced at home. He had often returned from long, hard days of work with aching hands, but he would still sit beside her. Listening to her play, she remembered one evening, when her hands had trembled with fear after a neighbor mocked her old violin. Her father had knelt in front of her, taken her little hands in his, and said, "Don't let their laughter steal your music. Promise me you'll never stop playing, no matter what they say." That promise echoed inside her now, louder than the crowd's cruelty. She took a long breath and forced herself to lift her chin again. Her eyes swept over the crowd, and though many still smirked, she searched for a single kind face. In the third row, she caught the sight of an older woman sitting straight, watching her without judgment. That calm, steady gaze gave her a small spark of strength. The mocking voices didn't stop. A boy in the corner cupped his hands around his mouth and made a fake violin sound, squeaking loudly to make others laugh. The audience chuckled, some even clapped mockingly. But instead of lowering her head again, the girl straightened her back. The cruel laughter was like fire, but inside that fire she found a strange strength. She realized that if she gave up now, they would always be right. They would remember her as the girl who ran away, and her father's dream would die with her. Her hands still trembled, but she adjusted her violin once more. She pressed it firmly under her chin and whispered to herself, "You can do this." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to steady her. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the laughing faces, and imagined her small room at home, imagined the stars outside her window, imagined her father clapping softly as she played. When she opened her eyes again, something in her had changed. The audience still mocked her, but she no longer listened. The cruel words felt distant, like echoes from far away. The only sound that mattered now was the one she was about to create. She tightened her grip on the bow, ignoring the sweat on her palms. She placed her fingers gently on the strings, feeling the familiar vibration. Her breath steadied, her shoulders relaxed just slightly. The hall was still buzzing with laughter, but she didn't care anymore. The promise she had made to her father was stronger than their cruelty. The cruel laughter that once made her feel small now lit a fire inside her chest. She decided she would not only play, she would pour her entire soul into the music. She would show them that their judgment was wrong, that their laughter could not crush her. The cruel laughter may have filled the hall, but her determination filled her heart. She was ready to fight back, not with words, not with anger, but with the one weapon she had always trusted, her music. And as she raised the bow again, the hall prepared to hear what they never expected from the girl they had mocked only moments before. The bow touched the strings, and the first sound escaped. It was soft, thin, and shaky, like the voice of someone too scared to speak. A few giggles bubbled up in the audience, and one person coughed loudly as if mocking her weak start. The girl's cheeks burned red, her chest tightened, and for a heartbeat she wanted to stop, but she pressed her eyes shut and forced herself to continue. Her small fingers moved clumsily over the strings, and the sound quivered again. She could hear the whispers around the hall, people leaning to one another, saying it was just as they expected. Some of the boys in the back row laughed openly, imitating her shaky notes with their own squeaky voices. The sound was cruel, but she blocked it out. She tried to imagine she was not in front of hundreds of judging eyes. She tried to imagine she was back in her tiny room at home, where the only audience was the night sky. She remembered the evenings when she had practiced by candlelight. Her father would sit beside her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but always filled with pride. She remembered how he would hum softly with the music. Even when the notes were wrong, "Don't stop," he would say. "The world will laugh until it hears the truth in your song." Those words came back now, wrapping around her trembling heart. She steadied her breath, holding the bow tighter. Slowly, carefully, she drew the bow again. This time the note was clearer, stronger than before. It was not perfect, but it carried something true, a piece of her soul. She let her mind slip away from the present, away from the mocking voices. Instead, she thought of her father's rough hands holding hers when she was younger, guiding her fingers on the strings. She thought of the nights when hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she still played, losing herself in the sound. Each memory gave weight to her music. The strings no longer sounded shaky, they began to sing. The vibrations filled the air, gentle at first but growing. The audience shifted in their seats, the mocking laughter faded a little. Something in the tone of her violin had changed. It was not just a sound anymore. It was a story. She leaned into the music, her bow moving with more confidence. Her fingers danced faster now, pressing the strings with surety. The hall that had once felt like a cage suddenly became her stage. Her eyes were still closed, but her face softened. The tension leaving her. The girl who had walked in nervously was fading. And in her place, an artist was awakening. The whispers died out, replaced by silence. The audience was listening now. Though they did not yet realize it, the melody wove through the air like threads of light. Delicate yet unbreakable, some leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity pulling them closer. They had expected failure, but now they were hearing something else, something raw and honest. The girl thought of her father again. She pictured him smiling at her from the front row, clapping softly with his tired hands. She thought of how proud he would be if he could hear her now. She let those emotions spill into every note. Every sound, her violin became her voice. Speaking the words her heart could not say, the sound swelled, filling the hall with warmth and sorrow all at once. The music spoke of long nights of hunger, of tears shed in silence, of the pain of losing the one person who had believed in her. Yet it also carried hope, the dream her father had left her, the promise she had sworn to keep. Each note was like a step forward, climbing out of darkness, reaching toward the light. The girl no longer heard the audience, she no longer felt their judgment. She was lost in the world of her own music. Her bow glided faster. Her fingers struck the strings with strength, and the sound grew richer, fuller. The hall vibrated with her determination, and the people who had laughed minutes ago now sat frozen. Her trembling was gone, her fear was gone. All that remained was the fire in her chest, burning brighter with every passing second. She poured her soul into the violin, letting it speak for her, letting it shout where her voice had been too small. The audience, once cruel, now sat in silence. Even the boys in the back row who had mocked her stopped moving. Their laughter had died in their throats, replaced by wide eyes and stiff hands. They could not believe this was the same nervous girl they had laughed at. The judges leaned forward, their pens still in their hands but forgotten. The sound had caught them too, pulling them into her story. The first note had been shaky, filled with nerves and fear. But now the music soared. It climbed higher and higher, filling every corner of the hall. The girl who had been mocked was no longer just a shy child. She was a musician, and her voice was louder than all their cruel words combined. And though she could not see it, though her eyes were still closed, the audience had changed. Their smirks were gone, replaced by something they could not explain. They were beginning to feel what she felt, to see what she saw. She was no longer the trembling girl who had walked on stage nervously. She was the promise of her father's dream. And her music had only just begun. Her hands no longer trembled. The bow slid across the strings with smooth control, and the sound that filled the hall was no longer the weak, shaky tune of a frightened girl. It was music alive with fire, carrying strength she didn't know she had. The notes rose and fell like waves, soft one moment, stormy the next. Every breath she took poured into the melody, and with each passing second her courage grew. The audience that had once mocked her now sat in silence. At first they had leaned back in their seats, ready to laugh at her mistakes, but slowly their bodies leaned forward, pulled in by the invisible force of her music. One man who had smirked earlier now blinked in surprise, his arms, once crossed tightly across his chest, loosened. A group of students who had chuckled at her entrance stopped whispering. Their mouths hung open as they stared at the girl on stage. Her face no longer looked nervous, her eyes remained closed, but her lips curved into the smallest smile. She looked calm, almost peaceful, as if the music itself carried her away from the hall. She was no longer standing in front of strangers. She was with her father again. She imagined him listening, his tired eyes shining with pride. His presence filled her heart, steadying her hands, guiding her bow. Each note carried a memory. The deep tones told of the cold nights when she had practiced with numb fingers. The bright, soaring notes carried the warmth of her father's laugh when she got it right. The quiet part spoke of hunger and loss, the times she had wanted to give up together. They formed a song that was more than music. It was her life, her pain, her love. The hall seemed to change around her. The laughter that had once bounced off the walls was gone. Replaced by a heavy stillness, people held their breath as if afraid to break the spell. A woman in the second row pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening. A man who had whispered a cruel remark earlier now wiped his eyes without realizing it. The mocking smiles had turned into wide, astonished stares. The judges leaned forward, one of them putting down his pen completely. Their faces softened. Their eyes followed her every move, captivated. They could see what the others now felt, that this was not just a performance, it was a confession, a prayer. A story told without words. Her bow moved faster, the strings crying out with intensity. The sound was fierce now, carrying all the hurt she had held inside. It was the grief of losing her father, the loneliness of being laughed at, the hunger that had twisted her stomach at night. But it was also the strength to rise above, the promise she had kept, the hope that lived inside her. Each note was like a heartbeat, strong and unyielding. The audience could not look away. The same people who had judged her clothes, her small frame, her nervous steps were now seeing something else entirely. They were seeing a warrior with a violin, a girl whose spirit burned brighter than their cruelty. Tears rolled down faces and not a single laugh remained. The hall was no longer a place of judgment. It had become a place of witness. Her shoulders moved with the rhythm. Her hair fell loose around her face as she leaned into the music. She did not hold back anymore. She gave herself completely, letting every hidden feeling pour through the strings. Her small body seemed to disappear, and all that remained was the sound, filling every corner of the room, climbing to the rafters, reaching every ear. The transformation was complete. The shy, nervous child who had walked onto the stage was gone. In her place stood a musician, powerful and unafraid. Her music had silenced the cruelty, crushed the laughter, and awakened something deep inside the audience. People who had come expecting entertainment found themselves facing truth. The final notes of this part of her song drifted softly through the air, and the silence that followed was unlike the silence before. It was not filled with judgment or mockery. It was filled with awe, with respect, with the weight of emotion too heavy for words. The girl opened her eyes then slowly, and for the first time, she looked at the audience not with fear but with quiet strength. She saw faces wet with tears. She saw the same boys who had laughed now staring in shame. She saw the judges nodding slightly, their eyes shining. For a brief moment, she understood that something had changed. She was no longer the nervous girl they expected to fail. She was the musician who had touched their hearts. Her hands relaxed on the bow, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. The transformation was not only in her music but in her soul. She had faced their cruelty and turned it into beauty. She had given them her pain and turned it into a gift. And as the echoes of her melody lingered in the hall, the audience sat frozen, still caught in the spell of the girl they would never forget. The sound of her violin rose higher, brighter, until the very walls of the hall seemed to vibrate with it. The girl stood in the center of the stage, her eyes closed, her body swaying gently with every note. She no longer looked like a nervous child holding an old violin. She looked like she had been born for this moment. The air itself seemed to thicken, carrying her music through every corner of the room. The audience sat frozen, not daring to move. The mocking smirks had long vanished, replaced by wide eyes and faces softened with emotion. A man in the back, who had been laughing the loudest earlier, now leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his mouth slightly open. He could not believe this was the same girl he had mocked. A woman in the second row dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, trying not to make a sound. She had not expected to be moved to tears by a child's music, but the melody had reached into her heart. The notes grew gentler like whispers, telling secrets that words could never hold. It was as if the violin itself spoke, and each person in the room could hear a story meant only for them. For one man, the music reminded him of the mother he had lost. For another, it carried him back to a childhood dream long forgotten. For a mother in the crowd, it sounded like the voice of her own daughter calling out for love. Everyone felt something different. But everyone felt deeply the girl played on, her bow gliding faster now. The melody rose like a storm, fierce and unstoppable, then it softened again, falling into a tender hum that tugged at every soul in the room. The audience's emotions followed her every move. Like waves pulled by the tide, some people gasped softly. Others covered their mouths, afraid that even their breathing might disturb the spell. One of the judges leaned back in his chair, his eyes glassy. He had listened to thousands of performances in his career. But this was different. This was not polished perfection or empty skill. This was raw truth, pain and hope poured into sound. His hand went to his chest, as if trying to steady his own heart. The boys in the back row, who had mocked her from the start, sat in stunned silence. One of them shifted uncomfortably, guilt flashing across his face. He remembered the cruel words he had whispered, and now he wished he could take them back. They could no longer laugh. The music had stolen the ground from beneath their arrogance. The hall was no longer an audience watching a performer. It was a room full of souls bound together by the same thread of sound. The music wrapped around them like a blanket, heavy and warm, pulling at their memories, their hidden wounds, and their silent dreams. Tears rolled down faces that had not known how to cry in years. Even the most stubborn hearts in the room felt themselves breaking open. The girl herself was lost inside the music. Her lips trembled, but not from fear. From the flood of feelings pouring through her, she thought of her father, the man who had sacrificed so much just to place this violin in her hands. She thought of the long nights when she had almost given up, when the hunger and the loneliness had felt too heavy. But each time she had lifted her violin, the sound had reminded her that she was still alive, still carrying his love. She let all of it out now, every scar and every hope. The music swelled into a powerful cry, and the hall seemed to shiver with it. People gripped the edges of their seats, pulled deeper into the storm of emotion. A young girl in the front row covered her ears at first, overwhelmed, but then lowered her hands. Tears streaming down her cheeks, she didn't understand why she cried. But the music made her heart ache in a way she had never felt before. As the song continued, the girl's body moved with it. Her bow cut through the air like a blade, fierce and sharp, then softened into strokes as delicate as feathers. The violin sang every word she could not say, telling the crowd who she was, telling them that she was not weak, not small, not worthless. She was strength. She was survival. She was the child of a father's dream. The judges exchanged glances but said nothing. Their eyes were wet, their hands still. They could feel what the audience felt, the truth that had silenced them all. The applause they would give later would not be enough to honor what they were hearing now. When the melody slowed again, turning soft and aching, the entire hall leaned into the silence between notes. Each pause felt like a heartbeat, each note like a tear falling. No one dared to speak, no one dared to laugh. The only sound was the music, and the soft sobs of those who could not hold back their emotions any longer. The audience, who had entered ready to judge, now found themselves humbled. They had seen her old violin, her plain dress, her nervous steps, and they had laughed. But now they understood. They were no longer laughing at a child. They were witnessing an artist who had opened her heart completely, and they were powerless against it. By the time her bow slowed to the last gentle notes of this passage, the crowd was in tears. Some cried silently, others openly, shoulders shaking. The sound had stripped away their pride, their arrogance, and left only truth. The girl opened her eyes for a moment. She saw them, hundreds of faces wet with tears. She did not smile, she did not bow, she simply played on, because she knew this was what her father had meant, that her music would one day be her voice. And for the first time she felt that voice had been truly heard. The music reached its final climb, the sound swelling like a wave before it breaks. The girl's arms moved with all the strength she had left, her bow slicing across the strings as if her very soul depended on it. The notes rose, sharper, louder, filling the hall with a cry that echoed off the high ceiling. The audience sat stunned, every eye locked on her, no one daring to blink. The same people who had once mocked her were now frozen in awe. Her body shook, not with fear, but with the weight of everything she was pouring out. Her breath came fast, her cheeks flushed. She leaned into the violin, her forehead nearly brushing its wooden frame. Every ounce of her pain, every moment of loneliness, every memory of her father's sacrifice. It was all there, woven into the song. The sound was no longer just music. It was her life story, loud, raw, unhidden then, With a sudden change, the music softened. The storm turned into a whisper. The notes slowed, stretching into long, aching sounds that seemed to hang in the air forever. People in the audience leaned forward without realizing, afraid to lose even a single breath of it. Some covered their mouths with their hands, others clutched at their chests. The silence between her strokes was just as powerful as the music itself. Each pause made hearts ache. Each gentle vibration pulled at their souls. She played as if she was speaking to her father directly, as if the whole hall had disappeared. The violin's voice was tender now, like a goodbye, like the last word spoken to someone you love. Her eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. She had cried too many times in private. Now her tears became music. Falling invisibly into the air, the audience was broken. Men who prided themselves on never showing weakness now wiped their eyes quickly. Hoping no one would see, women wept openly, their shoulders trembling. Even the judges, trained to keep their expressions neutral, were caught in it. One of them lifted his glasses to rub his eyes, another sat completely still, his lips pressed tight as if holding back his own sobs. The last few notes trembled softly, each one a farewell. The girl's hands moved slower, her bow caressing the strings with such care it was as if she feared breaking them. The hall was so silent that even the faint creak of the wooden stage beneath her shoes could be heard. The audience's breaths were shallow, quiet. Everyone waiting, not wanting the moment to end. Finally, her bow drew across the strings one last time. The sound rose, long and haunting, then faded into nothing. The note lingered in the air as though the hall itself refused to let it go. Her arms dropped to her side, her violin resting against her dress. She stood perfectly still, her chest heaving. Her eyes lowered for a long moment. No one moved. No one clapped. The silence was complete, heavy, filled with the weight of everything they had just felt. It was not the silence of mockery anymore. It was the silence of hearts too full to speak. The girl stared at the floor, not daring to look up, she thought. Maybe they still hated her. Maybe she had failed. She thought of running again, her legs trembling with exhaustion. And then it happened. A single pair of hands began to clap. Slow and steady, the sound echoed in the hall. Lonely at first but powerful. Then another pair joined, then another. The clapping grew louder, faster, until the entire hall erupted. The sound crashed over her like thunder, applause so strong it shook the room. People stood pushing back their chairs, rising to their feet one by one until the whole audience was standing. It was no longer just clapping, it was roaring. A storm of sound greater than her violin had ever made. Some people whistled, others shouted, "Bravo!" Their faces were wet with tears, their voices breaking with emotion. The same mouths that had laughed cruelly now cried out in awe. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her eyes widened as she saw the sea of people standing for her. She saw the boys in the back row, their heads bowed in shame even as they clapped. She saw the woman in the front row who was crying openly. She saw the judges on their feet, clapping with the rest, one of them even wiping his face with a handkerchief. Her knees weakened and she almost stumbled. She had never been applauded like this. She had never been celebrated, not once, not anywhere. And now the sound of hundreds of hands clapping for her filled the room. Her chest tightened, but this time not from fear. This time it was from joy, from relief, from the overwhelming feeling that her father's promise had not been in vain. She clutched her violin tightly, holding it as if it were her father's hand. She wanted to cry, but she held it back. Instead, she stood tall, her small frame glowing with pride she had never known before. She gave a small bow, her eyes glistening. The applause only grew louder, rolling through the hall like thunder that refused to stop. The moment lasted forever, or at least it felt that way. The girl who had entered the stage to laughter was leaving this song with an audience in tears. Their hearts had been changed, their eyes opened. They had come expecting failure, but they had been given truth. They had been given a piece of her soul, and as she stood there bathed in applause, she knew one thing with certainty. Her music had reached them. Her father's dream had lived through her, and in that hall for that moment, she was no longer the poor, nervous girl with an old violin. She was a musician who had moved the world. The applause thundered on, rolling through the hall like a wave that would not end. The girl stood frozen on the stage, her violin pressed tightly against her chest. She could hardly believe what was happening. A few minutes ago, the same crowd had laughed at her, mocked her clothes, doubted her. Now those same people were on their feet, clapping with tears on their faces. The sound was deafening, but inside her heart, it was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. She lowered her head, shy and overwhelmed. Her small frame shook, not from fear this time, but from the weight of emotions too big for her young body. She tried to bow, but her legs trembled. The applause did not stop. It grew louder as people cheered, whistled, and shouted words of praise. "Bravo! Amazing! Wonderful!" The sound wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and for a moment, she felt her father's presence in that storm of love. Then something unexpected happened. One of the judges pushed back his chair and stood. He was an older man, tall, with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen countless performances over the years. He wore a dark suit, neat and strict, but his face was soft now. His lips trembled as he looked at the girl. He clapped slowly, his eyes locked on her. Then, as if pulled by a force he could not resist, he stepped down from the judge's table and began to walk toward the stage. The hall grew quieter as people noticed him. The applause slowed, the cheers softened. All eyes turned to the judge as he climbed the steps of the stage. The girl looked at him in confusion, her fingers gripping the violin tighter. Her heart pounded. Was she in trouble? Did she do something wrong? She stood stiff, unsure of what to do. The man approached her, his eyes shining with tears. He stopped a few feet away, and for a long moment he simply stared at her, as though searching for words. Finally, in a voice thick with emotion, he said, "You reminded me tonight of something I had forgotten. When I was a boy, I too was laughed at for dreaming of music. I too held an old instrument that others mocked. I too was told I was not good enough." His voice broke, and he paused, swallowing hard. The audience held its breath, every ear strained to catch his words. The girl blinked, her own eyes wide with surprise. She had not expected this strict, powerful man to confess something so personal. He took another step closer and said, "I see myself in you, child, and I see something greater. You did not just play music tonight. You gave us your heart, your pain, your hope, and that is the mark of a true musician." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but no words came out. The hall was utterly silent except for his voice. His next words shocked everyone. "From this day on, you will not walk this road alone. I will see to it that you receive a full scholarship to the finest music academy in the city." Gasps echoed through the hall. People turned to one another in disbelief. Some clapped again, others wiped their eyes. The girl's knees nearly gave way. A scholarship? To the academy she had dreamed about but never dared to hope for? Her lips parted in shock and her violin slipped slightly in her hands. She had imagined applause, maybe even kind words, but this was beyond her dreams. The judge's eyes softened further as he added, "Your father's love gave you this start. Let me help you carry it further. Let me help you shine as you were meant to." His voice cracked and a tear slid down his cheek. The audience erupted again, clapping wildly, cheering. The sound filled the hall like thunder once more. The girl could not stop the tears now. They spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the violin tighter. She nodded again and again, unable to speak. Her small body shook with sobs, but she smiled through them. The crowd cheered louder. Some people shouted, "She deserves it." "Yes, she does." The energy in the hall was like fire, burning bright with joy. The judge placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, bending slightly so his face was closer to hers. "Play again, child," he whispered. "Play for yourself, for your father, and for the world. They will hear you now." His words were not just a request, but a blessing. The girl looked into his eyes, and for a moment, she felt as if her father was speaking through him. The applause went on, but inside the girl's heart, everything felt still. She lifted her violin slowly, her hands steady. She was no longer the girl who had entered nervously, no longer the child mocked for her plain dress and old instrument. She was a musician chosen, recognized, lifted by the very people who had once doubted her. As she prepared to play again, she took one last look at the judge. Her face glowing with gratitude, he gave her a small nod, his own tears still glistening, and in that moment, the promise she had made to her father felt complete. She had not stopped playing, and because of that, the world had finally heard her. Years passed, but the memory of that night never left her. The girl who had once stood trembling on stage with an old scratched violin was no longer just a nervous child. She had grown into a young woman whose name was whispered in concert halls across cities. Her music traveled further than she ever dreamed. Each performance brought new faces, new hearts touched, and new tears shed by people who listened. The scholarship the judge had given her opened doors she never knew existed. At the academy, she trained under masters who were astonished by her raw talent. They tried to teach her technique, polish her skills, but what amazed them most was that her music never lost its soul. She did not play like others. She did not chase perfection. She played like every note carried a memory, a piece of her life, a voice of someone who had lived through struggle and hope. In the academy's great halls, she practiced for hours until her fingers blistered. But she never complained. She remembered her father's words, remembered the promise she had made to him, and with each practice session she whispered, "This is for you, Papa." Her classmates admired her. Some even envied her. But no one could deny that when she played, it felt as if time itself paused. Her first major concert came when she was barely 17. The hall was packed. Critics sat with pens ready. Audiences filled every seat. Many had come curious to see the girl who had once brought an entire room to tears. The lights dimmed, silence fell, and when she stepped onto the stage, holding her same old violin, now repaired but still hers, the world held its breath. She played and the world wept again. Soon her name traveled far. She performed in grand cities, under golden chandeliers and in open-air stages where the stars listened. People called her a prodigy, a miracle, but she never thought of herself that way. She was still the little girl playing for her father, still the child who remembered the sound of cruel laughter and the strength it gave her to never give up. Reporters often asked her how she played with such emotion. She always smiled softly and said, "Because I know what it means to lose, and I know what it means to love." They never fully understood, but her music explained it better than words ever could. She carried her father's memory with her everywhere, at every concert. She looked at the empty front seat and imagined him sitting there, clapping gently, eyes full of pride, and though he was gone, she felt him in every note guiding her, reminding her never to stop. Years later, when she was famous enough that crowds would line up for hours just to hear her play, she returned to the small town where it all began. The same hall where she had once been mocked was still there. Though older now, the stage had been polished, the seats replaced, but the memories remained. She stepped onto that stage again, older, stronger, her name now celebrated across nations. The hall was full once more, but this time no one laughed, no one mocked. They all rose to their feet before she even began, giving her a standing ovation just for walking in. As she lifted her violin, her heart swelled. She thought back to that night, to the nervous child who had trembled under the weight of cruel whispers. She thought of how she had closed her eyes, remembered her father, and found the courage to play. And she realized then that without that night, she might never have become who she was. She played again, and the hall filled with her music. This time, she was not playing to prove herself, not playing against laughter. She was playing to give back, to thank the people, even those who had once mocked her, for being part of her story. Her music washed over them, and once more tears filled the room. After the concert, children came running up to her, holding their own small instruments. Their eyes shone with admiration. One little girl tugged at her dress and whispered, "They laugh at me too, but I want to play like you." The violinist bent down, smiling, and placed her hand gently on the child's cheek. "Then promise me one thing," she said softly. "Never stop playing, no matter what they say." Her story spread beyond music. Schools taught about her life. Newspapers wrote about her rise from poverty to greatness. She became not only a musician but a symbol, proof that even when the world mocks you, even when you stand small and alone, your voice matters, your dreams matter. In her later years, when her hair began to turn silver, she still played. Her fingers slower, her body weaker, but her music stronger than ever. Audiences filled halls to hear her one last time. And when she played her final concert, she chose the same song she had played that first night, the song that had turned laughter into tears. She poured her life into every note, and when the last sound faded, the hall erupted with applause that shook the walls. She bowed, her eyes wet, and whispered in her heart, "I kept my promise." Papa, her legacy lived on, not just in recordings, not just in stories, but in the hearts of every child who picked up an instrument despite being mocked. Every young dreamer who remembered her tale stood taller, played louder, and believed harder. She had proved something eternal. Never judge by appearances, never mock a dream, because sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth, and so the girl who had once been mocked became the woman who taught the world to listen.